Welcome to Dear Watchers, an omniversal comic book podcast where we do a deep dive into the multiverse.
We are traveling with you through the stories and the worlds that make up an omniverse of fictional realities we all love. And your watchers on this trip continue to be me, Guido.
And me, Rob, and an extra very special guest, a creator extraordinaire.
Yes, she is.
You will meet in a few moments. And if you are listening to us for the first time, well, welcome. We are here to be your guides through fictional realities, and we love talking to people who create those realities and sharing that all with you. But before we get into today's episode, Guido, what's happening in our little corner of the multiverse?
Well, the week that this episode is coming out, we are also on Comic Book Keepers, or that episode is about to be out. I'm not sure, but you should be listening to Comic Book Keepers regardless. And we were happy to join their show to talk about the Uncanny X-Men Teen Titans crossover from many years ago. That's a real classic. So make sure to check us out on Comic Book Keepers. Listen to all their episodes regardless. And you can go check out that episode right now or in the very near future. We also just started teasing our Amalgaminis, whatever those might be. More information is going to be coming out the week this episode aired. And we're so excited to share this project we've been working on with Elliot. And last but not least, it's gift shopping season for a lot of people. And our coffee page where you can support us, where you can follow us, you can also get some fun merch. So some of the commissioned art we have is on there. Some silly things that we've made to celebrate your love of multiverses and the omniverse. So go check that out.
Or if you don't like to wear clothes, we also have gifts for your ears and eyes with little essays and of course our spin-off podcast too.
That's true. All that's accessible on Coffee.
And joining us today is a writer of almost every medium there is.
I think every medium.
Yeah, I think every medium. We've got live action, we've got animation, we've got comics, we've got TV, we've got movies,
podcasts.
Okay, it's time to reveal. Well, you know who it is because you saw the episode description. But it is Megan Fitzmartin. And Megan is mostly working right now on DC Comics.
We have a whole full bio that we'll get into when she joins us in just a moment.
Yes, and I believe, Guido, she's working on one of your favorite characters now, Tim Drake Robin.
Yes.
Yes, we loved getting to talk to Megan. And Guido, what was your biggest or one of your biggest takeaways from this conversation?
It's hard to decide, and it's funny for those people who are listening to Omniversity, our spin-off podcast for patrons. It's so much about story, and that's the world of fictional reality and that language we use. And so much of this conversation with Megan was about story and the emotional dimension of story. And at one point she said story changes people. And it's true, but I think we all know that. But what Megan was talking about was the emotional relationship we have to stories and the way that we get to explore our emotions and other people's emotions through story. It's really, really powerful. And a lot of Megan's backstory that she shared and then what she's trying to do with stories in terms of making people feel seen and feel loved is really powerful. I think it's why she is my favorite writer of 2022, and I think it's why this conversation was so good. What about you? What was a takeaway for you from this conversation?
One thing I think I took away, which you can apply no matter what you do, you don't have to be in comics, is to have hope, not expectations. And I think there could be a really fine line between those two words, hoping for something or kind of expecting it. And sometimes I think I can definitely fall into that latter category of, yes, I'm just expecting this to happen. But I really loved how she went into that and really how that mindset has played such an integral part in her journey as a creator.
Yeah. So let's get into it. I hope people enjoy it, and I hope you go out and support Megan's work and pick up her books.
And with that, dear watchers, welcome to episode 74, and let's check out what's happening in the multiverse with today's conversation. Welcome to our extra special guest, writer and creator, Megan Fitzmartin. Hello, Megan.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being here. And before we dive in, Guido is going to attempt to introduce you.
All right.
Best of luck. Better you than me.
Well, yes, because I can talk you up in a way that I think most people don't like to say about themselves.
True.
So feel free to correct, though, because we try to honor our guests for taking their time joining us with a full picture of who they are. And as I mentioned to you before we started, I'm a big fan of your work. So I tried to capture why in your background. So it's clear that Megan Fitzmartin loves stories, joining the long-running TV show Supernatural's writer room as an assistant. You then became writing staff and wrote a few episodes. You've written for DC Superhero Girls cartoon, Peacock Supernatural Academy, co-wrote the Justice Society World War II DC Universe animated movie, which has a very cool multiversal twist that I wasn't expecting when I watched it. And Megan has written fictional podcasts with some pretty spooky, creepy, and mysterious stories that unfold over the course of them. And of course, you've made quite a mark already on comics with less than a few dozen under your belt. Your work, I'm going to call it legendary. Megan started with the Future State Robin books, joining in on some other Bat Family backups and standalone, including the very recent Zatanna backup in the Dark Crisis tie-in, but perhaps most famously writing the story of Tim Drake becoming his full self, his bisexual, queer Robin self in Batman Urban Legends. And you just wrapped the multiversal and way under-talked about Dark Crisis Young Justice series. Have an upcoming story in the Tales from Earth 6 celebration of Stan Lee, revisiting his Just Imagine DC universe, which is so cool. And you're writing the really fun ongoing mystery book, Tim Drake Robin. So, Megan, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. That was amazing. I was taking notes on, did I do that? I know I did it. But it's been a while. That was amazing. Thank you so much.
Well, it was cool. And what I really liked, I try to do as much research as I can to write these bios, but I love how you lay out on your website each medium you work in and the things that inspired you. And so actually that helped us think about our questions, and because you clearly have just such a deep relationship to story. So that was very cool. You made it easy.
I do what I can. I'm trying. I was an assistant for a long time, so I think that partly helps.
Well, yeah, can you tell us, Megan, a little bit, too, about your early fandom of stories, comics, and otherwise? Because I'd love to hear, some of the formative stories that I know you've mentioned that have influenced you early on were like seeing The Lion King, which definitely I can remember is one of the first movies I ever saw in the theater, seeing The Lost World, seeing the Spider-Man movies in the theaters. So where did that early fandom come from? What were some of those early influences?
I think something that we don't really talk about is generational fandom. So my mom was a Beatles fangirl. Absolutely, that was a huge part of her existence. She was never one of the ones that you see in the videos or anything like that, but she had such a history of loving the Beatles, and she has this deep love for Julie Andrews, and so I do think that I come by it honestly. I also grew up in the church, and what is church if not a deep fandom? And so I think that I was sort of primed at a very early age to understand that story changes people. Story can be incredibly powerful, and paying attention to that. I was not an outdoors kid until I was sort of forced to be when I was in my teenage years. We went to Hawaii, and it was the best part is the outside. Just figure it out, kid. But it took me a while before I was really an outdoors kid, and I was always reading. I read the Nancy Drew books when I was little, and I remember, like you said, I remember The Lion King, I think, was my first movie experience. Going to see Spider-Man was a formative experience because it was the first. My family is incredibly. I grew up sheltered. that I'm the oldest of 5 kids, so that sort of faded by the time the youngest one was kicking around. But I was the guinea pig, and so I was incredibly sheltered on a lot of stuff. And then, but my dad grew up on comics, and so that was sort of the fandom that he existed in, and was like, oh no, I'm taking you to see Spider-Man. It doesn't matter that it's PG-13. Like, of course I'm going to take you to see this. And it was, I think, those moments where it was just, of course we would experience this. Of course we will watch Julie Andrews in this thing. Of course we will watch Spider-Man. Of course. It led me towards story in a way that I'm so grateful for. And I think the first thing that I discovered on my own, the 2 things actually that I discovered on my own, which were incredibly formative, were The Lost World, which you mentioned, which was, I try to explain to people, it was a Canadian-Australian co-pro that was only 3 seasons, somehow found its way on TNT in the mornings before school. It is bonkers crazy. One of the first episodes, there's a giant bee, and that's fine. And it spoke to what you could do with things and like the big swings that you can take in stories. And that one, and then Fantastic Four was the comic that I found on my own, and realized that, so while you can take big swings in something like The Lost World, it boils down at the end of the day to character and story. I will fight for Reed Richards till the end of my dying day, because of his character, because Mark Waid is the one that I first read, and it was such a character study on who Reed was, and I was like, that is it. That is what I love at the end of the day. That is what I love about stories, is how it shows us character, how it shows us who we can be in a world that is sometimes a little too big to feel things. I couldn't always feel my emotions with my family, but in stories I could feel it. And in stories I could live in a world that felt like it was falling apart. And even if that wasn't literally what was happening in my world, I could process those emotions in story.
Yeah, I think I love that thing about you were saying about generational fandom, because I think for all of our parents probably grew up around the same generation, that Beatles generation, and their parents didn't, I think, really have that kind of fandom. I think in the same way, because that was like the World War II generation, and I think those parents being our parents' generation, kind of being that first kind of teenage era. So I think they were super, I feel like our parents were super excited to bestow their fandoms onto us, because they didn't have that experience with their parents. So I think there was a lot of introduction, certainly from like my dad, to like his favorite movies, his favorite music, because I don't think he really got that from his parents.
Absolutely. But I think the thing is, we tend to look at fandom as being just a media-based thing. And I think that became a sort of a non-heated way to explore spaces with your kid. Whereas, like, I do think that previous generations' version of fandom was church. And that becomes its own sort of heated discussion in the same way that you find fandom wars and ship wars on Twitter. But there was a little bit more, like, the stakes were a bit higher. And so I think that, like, you couldn't just casually enjoy that fandom, really.
I will say that, it's funny you're talking about the way it relates to parent and child. When the very rare occasion over my life when I've thought about having children, which I won't, and I instead teach. But when I think about it, it's usually, and this is why I know I shouldn't have, and I'm glad I didn't, because I usually am like, I want someone to brainwash with all the things that I love. Like, I want someone who I can pass that love on to, and I'm glad I didn't do that, and I can do it with my students and my friends' children.
Whenever brainwash sort of comes into the conversation, you're like, well, maybe we should take a step back.
Exactly. Yeah, I often get told I don't have the highest tolerance for people who don't like the things that I like.
Fair.
So that's why I shouldn't parent in that way. Well, I love the emotional dimension also of the storytelling that you talked about. So I'm really curious now to think about, how did you transform that into a job? How did you take your love of story and start doing it professionally?
Yeah, so I've talked about this before, but my way to finding a way to tell stories was a little unconventional. I have a degree in church ministry. I was going to be a youth pastor, and that led me to story in a way that, I've talked about church before just seconds ago, and one of the things that I wanted to do is to tell people that they're loved. That has been my guiding light, my North Star, and that is what I wanted to do as a youth pastor. And so I ended up taking classes on writing for television and radio, because I grew up listening to a radio show that was really influential to my life as well. Another one of the fandom things, it was called Adventures in Odyssey. It's incredibly Christian, but I would argue one of the two good things that has come out of Christian media, that and VeggieTales. You cannot go wrong with singing dancing vegetables. You just can't. But I wanted to learn how to write for radio, and this class had nothing to do with radio. It was only television. And I was like, well, I really like this too, though. And the further I got into my degree, the more I realized, no, but this is how I want to tell people they're loved, is through story. This is how I learned that I was loved, was through story. This is how I learned that how to be a human being, how to love other people, how to engage with other people. It's through story. And so I completely changed the entire course of my life after graduating and moved to LA and just put my nose down, put nose to the grindstone, and was like, I just want to write. I just want to write. I love every medium. I have written for every medium. And that is because all I really want to do is to tell people that they're loved, that they have a place in this world, that they're important, that they matter. And so I think of that as an extension of my degree, because that's what I wanted to do with my degree, is to tell people that they are loved. And so that is the emotional thrust of everything that I write. That is the emotional push. That is what I want to say every day. So that's how I got here.
That's amazing.
That is so amazing. Yeah. Really, I feel like we could stop there because that's so powerful.
And it's funny because I think you really have written for every medium. I mean, and it's so funny that you were saying that you were so in love with radio, and now you've written narrative podcasts, which is the radio of 2020. Yes. and you've written comics, and you're now writing films as well. Does that approach to storytelling, that approach to world building, how do you have to approach it differently, whether you're writing a television show or a film or a comic or a podcast that's only audible? Is there a different approach that you have to make?
So I come from a very, once I make the decision of like, oh, okay, I want to write for this medium, or I want to write this story. It's not even the medium. I start with the story and I start like, okay, I want to tell this story. I want to tell this character's story. From there, I tend to go, okay, well, in what medium do I want? Does this make sense more as a comic? Does this make sense more as a novel? Does this make sense more as a TV script? And then from there, once I answer that question, the question becomes, who am I writing for? And that's not actually audience. That is, literally speaking, who am I going to give this script to? So if I'm writing if I'm writing a comic book, I am writing for my artist and my editor. So that is very different than when I'm writing a podcast and I am writing for my writers and my sound designer. Or not my writers, my actors and my sound designer. It's animation. I am writing for the storyboard artists and the animators and my actors. Television, I'm writing for hundreds of departments. Just hundreds of them. And so that to me is the real key in writing different mediums, is remembering who it is that is going to be helping you in the story that you're telling. Because all of the stories, even if you're writing a novel, you are writing it with someone else. All storytelling is collaborative. It's cooperative. And so you are not the only one telling the story. I am not the only one telling any of my stories. I can rattle off names of the people that have made the things that you love as much as I made them, and that is so much fun because it's not just me. I am a very limited person, and I know that I'm a limited person. And so being able to work with like these brilliant folks that have been able to make these different dreams and visions come to life, be it through the notes process or through amazing art or amazing sound design, amazing acting, like it wouldn't be the thing that you love because without them, because it would only be part of the story.
Mm-hmm. Do those restrictions in certain mediums, do those inspire you creatively, working with, okay, these are flesh and blood actors, they can only do, obviously, certain things, and we only have a more limited budget with that compared to, say, a comic where maybe you're limited in terms of page count, but of course you can have kind of anything that you want on the page? Like, how do those restrictions inspire you?
I love restrictions. I'm a weirdo. I love one of the things that I loved working on Supernatural is that like it harkened back to a time before you'd get like 8 million an episode. God bless. We never had that. There was no world. And that pushed to becoming some of the best stories that you get from that show. And I think that goes all the way back to I recently started watching Star Trek for the first time, and some of the best episodes of original Star Trek are when you can clearly see they had no money. They just this was a bottle episode because we had to like save money for the next episode, and those restrictions made everybody really think and work their darndest. And so yeah, I think restriction in mediums is also part of the fun of it. How do I tell a story in comics with just static images? These things, they don't move. So how can I get this story across? I'm working on a story right now that is very dense for the amount of pages it is. And there's never enough pages. Even in a TV script, I'm like, 45 pages is nothing. That is not enough time. And so having those limitations, I think, tend to make the story better.
Yeah. Comics, when you were talking about how collaborative in nature, I was thinking too about comics. They can always do better, but they're one of the medium where I feel like the team is much more visible. Maybe it's more that I'm just biased as a comic fan, but you know, you can have a movie written and directed by some auteur creator, and you forget that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people who contributed to it. But a comic, you at the very least have the writer, the artist, and now luckily we have the inker, the colorist, the letterer, all being credited right up front at the start of the issue. So I feel like it's a medium that is more visibly collaborative in a real positive way. So
yeah, absolutely.
I want to talk about your work in comics more. How did it start? How did you start creating comics? You loved them, you were a fan, your parents were, your father was a fan.
Yeah.
How did you start creating?
So I knew that I wanted to write comics. I had really been focused on writing television. Frankly, that is the one that gives you the most money. So I was like, this is the one that I am going to pay more attention to so that I can do the other ones that I love and still survive. And so I had gotten my job on Supernatural and was like, okay, I'm going to focus on this, and I feel very strongly about this, and I'm that is great. I feel in a good place with this. But I am so easily bored. I have to be doing like 500 things at once. My agents constantly get so tired of me because I'm like, so I'm working on this, and I'm working on this, I'm working on this, and they're like, ah! But I love having something else in my brain to be able to work through, because I think that that's what really helps me when it comes to something like a writer's block or something like that. Writer's block tends to be a time, for me at least, where I need to think a little bit more about the story, and the best way for me to think more about a story is to get myself out of that medium and put myself into a different medium. And so I was working in television stuff, but I was like, okay, I really want to try my hand at comics. I really want to see what that gets me, like what that stirs in my brain, and I just want to do it. So I took a comic book writing class here in LA, and was like, I'm just going to make my own. I'm going to figure it out myself. I hired this amazing artist. Her name is Yasmin. She is absolutely killing it right now. She was on the DC Milestone program, and she's doing a cover for Mark Waid's Batman v Robin, and I could not be prouder of her. She is so amazing. Her art is beautiful, and I found her through Twitter and was like, hey, can you do this for me? Like, I'll pay, obviously we'll pay you. And she was really influential with helping me figure out how to do early stages of writing a script, like comic book script, how to talk to artists and things like that. And I got a lot of work out of that on just doing it on my own, so that when the opportunity came, which was about a year later, that opportunity came because I had been working in DC animation. I had just finished working on the Justice Society movie with Jeremy Adams, and I had a great time with that. And DC Animation reached out to us and was like, hey, DC Comics is looking for some new writers. Would you guys be interested? And we were like, yes, 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 yes. Yes. And we were able to, we sat in on the strangest meeting of my entire life. It's a meeting that I still think about to this day, because it was just the last couple of days of Dan Didio as editor there. And I was like, oh, he knew that it was coming. It was such a strange experience. But it worked out really well in that they were interested in us, we were interested in them, and I felt confident and comfortable being able to work in this space because I had the practice that I sought out myself to do. Like, I was the one that really pushed my way out, and that's a thing that I think everybody should absolutely do. Is you don't have to know. I did not go to school for any of this. Cannot stress this enough. My degree, I have a BS in church. Like, that is sort of where I'm coming from. And it is possible to do. I didn't know anyone that worked in comics. I didn't know anyone that worked in television. So
an inspiration you are. So did that meeting is what led to your work on Future State. Is that your first professional comic credit as Future State, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Future State was the first one, that I did. I had a meeting with a couple different editors after that meeting, some one-on-ones, and I ended up meeting with Paul Kaminsky, who's now the group editor for Superman, and just the nicest, just a fantastic guy. And we talked about Tim Drake, and that's the my initial entrance into working with Tim Drake.
Yeah. And so why did you know the urban legend story that was going to be coming when you were doing Future State?
No, so I was just happy to write anything. I didn't know if they were ever going to ask me back after that, to be perfectly honest. I was like, fingers crossed. I really hope so, but who knows? You never know. And I never expect, I only hope. And so, I had written the Future State. I was sort of hopeful, but didn't have really any strong. I was like, I'm going to still talk to everybody, but no real plans. And then Dave Wilgus reached out to me. He was editing Batman Urban Legends at the time, and was like, hey, loved your work on Robin Eternal. Would you be interested in writing more Tim Drake? And I was like, yes, obviously, yes. I love this kid. He is the Robin of my generation. Like, he is such a reflection of the millennial Robin. And so I was like, yeah, absolutely. Of course I would. And so that's when I sort of got an idea on what I wanted to do with the Urban Legend story.
And I have to, our podcast tends to be more about the multiverse, but we have to ask, as two queer podcast hosts and comic fans, more about that. So how did it work? Was it your idea? Was it easy? As much as you're able to and want to share, it's just, it's huge, and it's been a sustained change, and I hope it will remain a change forever. But how did it happen?
So I sent a very tentative email to Dave saying, hey, bud. So I I had done a lot of reading. I was like, I really wanted to write a good story for Tim. Once again, I come from an emotional space for every character that I write. And that emotional space has to be like, what is the point? What is the point of the story that we're telling? Why am I telling this kid's story? There's always something. There's always a reason to tell someone's story. But it's finding the right one. I don't want to tell a bad story because I want to tell the one that feels organic to me. If other people think it's bad, I don't care. But, like, I want to know. I want to feel that it's the organic story for me. And so I had done a bunch of reading. I had just really dove in, and that's what felt like the organic story. And so I reached out. He was like, okay, let me talk to some people. And I was like, okay, I'll sit here and wait. I don't know what that story will be when they say no, but and it wasn't that I had an assumption. I just knew that this was going to be potentially a hard thing to do. And it really wasn't. And I was so pleased. I got an email back from Dave going, you know what, you're right, you're good to go. Because I laid it all out. I think I sent like pictures of panels of like, here is exhibit A, exhibit B. Like I gave them just a full dossier on how I'm correct and how you let me write this. And they were like, you know what, you're right. I think that this is the right way to go with this character, and wished me well. And they were amazing. And my fear was only me personally being like, oh, I just don't know. But yeah, it turned out amazing, and truly surprised by, I don't know, like we knew that it was going to be a big deal in the like comics world. But when the day broke, Dave sent the whole team an email and was like, hey guys, so today was a lot. It was maybe more than we expected. But it was amazing. It was beautiful. Like, it was everything that I could have hoped and dreamed for, and was so excited because it felt like the right time for Tim and DC and the world.
And what's really amazing about it, and I think you've told us why without even me asking, is the story wasn't being driven by his sexuality or his exploration of who he is, or even his relationship to Bernard so much. It was being driven by just this character who's finding himself and finding and figuring out what that means in every way. It wasn't, some sort of heavy-handed after-school special type story. And luckily, I think we've moved away from that in comics recently, but honestly only in the last 2 years, and only I think from you, Tim Drake, and then John Kent felt the same way. It feels like it was like a domino effect. Everything happened where now it could just be an organic part of a story that this character is queer, but that's not the driving force behind the story.
No.
And that was really powerful.
Thank you.
In the ongoing right now of Tim Drake, which I hope lasts a really long time, because you are what's cool about it is you're actually using story. This first arc has so much to do with story. Like, I have to look up the stories you're referencing, because you're referencing these 1800 detective stories, and I'm like, did she make that up or is that real? And then I look and it's real, and I'm like, wow, you pulled in a character and got your love of story in there too. So that's really fun. How the ongoing plotting come about.
Thank you. Yes, I'm sorry, not sorry that you have to look up some amazing stories that you should absolutely read. That actually came up. So I just read some of those stories. Mostly the very first one that I referenced. I was in Paris last year and went to this bookstore called Shakespeare and Company. And I like to buy books as souvenirs because I am the most myself. And I picked up The Paris Mysteries by Edgar Allan Poe, and I was like, oh, right, I had heard of this. And I think I read it when I was a kid, but I had not read it, since then. I was like, this is so good. This is so good. And when we were talking about Tim and doing an ongoing for Tim, I was like, the thing that everyone always talks about is that he's a detective. Always. Mm-hmm. And that he exists in the pantheon of other amazing, great detectives. We should bring that in. Especially because I think for a large part of Tim, his story right now is on identity. What is this identity that he is in? And I think that is true for a lot of us where we are at in our lives right now. It's definitely part of what I was trying to do with Young Justice, of saying we were supposed to be this one thing, and now like that time has passed, and we're no longer the like golden education, like the higher education children who like were burnt out at a very young age. We're just burnt out and not impressive.
Yes.
So that's been the story that I've been wanting to tell with Tim, and wanting to get to the bare bones basics of that is detective. So we started with detective stories and pulling from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very cool. And so on Young Justice now, the multiversity, the Dark Crisis Young Justice, it might be my favorite comic of 2022. Because I actually wasn't even a huge fan of Young Justice, but I was a fan of what was happening around it, and I knew enough of the lore that I could see the beats you were pulling in, and even, I don't want to spoil it, the final issue is pretty fresh, and people should read it, but you hit these beats like why, or you refer to why Tim and Cassie kissed after Connor died. And like, I remember that moment. I think most people who were reading DC 20 years ago remember that moment, or 15 years ago when that was. So you pull in all these pieces of the characters to tell this story about growing up ultimately, but you're also doing it through this multiverse and Mickey Mixelplix, who is an awesome, evil, horrible incel character that I love.
Thank you. He was very fun. When we got the art in and he had a beanie, I was like, oh, that's too good. That's upsettingly good.
So how did that title come about?
Dave, once again, he is wonderful and lovely. He and I grew up with Young Justice, and we were sort of talking about it and talking about how it relates to us today, and just the sort of, there's been a lot of discontent in the news. There's been a lot of discontent with millennials, and it was like sort of my own way of dealing with the frustration of the world as it is right now, and looking at the people ahead of us who were like, oh no, like it'll be your turn soon, and then raising up other heroes to like be the person I was supposed to be, and that's hard. It's really hard, and the way that I look at comics is like, what better way to process the strangeness of our world than to deal with it in comics? Look at it from a different perspective, different point of view. Cassie and Bart especially were really important to me in Young Justice and in this. And even just like growing up as a kid, reading comic books as a girl and being like, I don't know that, like, and this isn't necessarily Young Justice as much as it is all comics. When I was a kid, it was so hard to find girls that like felt like me, and that was hard. And I remember having to like feel like I needed to be one of the guys and be different than who I was, and that was hard and hurt because I like myself and I like being me. And so wanting to give Cassie that space to like be herself and not tied to Robin or Connor, but like existing on her own and recognizing that like she is great and she is on her own and she is this like really amazing character that has done so much and continues to be such a kick-ass character. So being able to play with those characters and play with my own sort of feelings about the world that we're in right now was really cathartic, at least for me.
well, me too.
Yeah.
Good. I'm glad.
Do you feel like you've seen that diversity reflected in the audience that you meet at Comic-Cons as well? That they're seeing themselves on the page a lot more?
I have. So I went to my very first convention as a person who writes comics. this past year at New York Comic Con, and that was really surprising and really exciting. And I was so pleased and heartened by the people that I met, and of which both of you were there, I believe. Was wonderful. And yeah, I was so delighted by the reminder, because I think it's very easy to like forget your audience whenever you are on social media all the time, and like I try not to be, but it's right there, and sometimes you need a brain break. And it's not a place that encourages goodness. It is a place that encourages all of the worst things in people, and I don't begrudge it. I am grateful that people are so passionate. I think that that's amazing. That is what fandom comes from, is absolute passion for the things that you love. But going to a convention, it was so nice to see the people that I don't always see the voices of and go, oh, right, I am writing this for you. I am writing this. This matters and is important because you matter and are important. And I was so... I don't know. I had the best time. It was exhausting. I was absolutely... It took me like 2 weeks to recover afterwards. But yeah, I have been seeing more. I was able to talk to queer readers as well as young readers who were just like, yeah, no, this makes sense to me. I understand this. And I was like, great, perfect. They're like, I hadn't read comics before, or any of DC comics before, and now I'm reading these. And I'm like, that is great. There are so many that I can tell you about, and I'm so excited for you to read them.
That's great, too, because I sometimes feel like comics, I mean, it is like, we think of it sometimes as I think of it as an aging medium, where the fans are getting older, and there's more talk about, speculation. It's more about collecting maybe for that reason. So it's great to hear that you're meeting these younger fans, because that's what's going to keep this medium alive.
Yes, absolutely. That was what I was most excited about. I was like, oh, thank God. Good, like, please read more comics. This is a great medium that you belong in, and it matters. It was important for me as a kid, so I'm excited to see more kids read them as well.
Well, and it's one nice thing, too, I think, the influence of YA books on comics just can't be overstated. It's enormous, especially DC, who has the whole YA line, and it's fantastic. But what's cool is you're writing stories in the mainstream comics, in the primary titles, in the main Earth titles, in the hero titles, so that way, the young people who are accessing it might also find their way into those comics and not have to stay siloed in the YA segment of the industry. So
absolutely, it's about accessibility, like as with most things should be about accessibility. But sometimes there's just so much, and you don't know where to start, and that's okay. I remember that. I had no idea where to start half the time with any of the comics. Like making things accessible for new readers to come in and feel like they're not going to be laughed out of their comic book shop is important.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you have this Just Imagine Stan Lee created the DC Universe story coming up at the end of December. You had your foray into multiverse with Young Justice and the Justice Society movie. What is your background with multiverses in storytelling and alternate universes?
I mean, as you mentioned, I worked on Supernatural, which we love nothing more than what if this crazy thing? What if the boys went to real life Canada where we filmed the show? Some good stuff comes from that. And then I write an audio drama. We've been on an extended hiatus at the moment because I've been very blessed with work. But I write a podcast called Red Rhino, which is all about extended universes, actually, and all about what if this is the last timeline that you have to get things right, and what does that mean? And I am fascinated by timelines when there's stakes. I think sometimes the storylines that I don't like with timelines is when they don't feel like there are any stakes to that. But when that tells a really important part or an aspect of the character, there's a Mark Waid piece of advice that I think about all the time and love with my whole heart. He is talking about writing a Flash issue or story, and he's talking about how the kids were, it was Wally, and the kids were in trouble, and Wally, like the twins were going to be killed. Like he had to save one or the other. He couldn't save them both, and he obviously saves them both. And you knew that they were going to, because it's about faults. It's gone from my brain now. False Jeopardy. So when you're reading this comic and you're like, well, I know, like I, a person who has read a lot of comics, know that you're not going to kill one of these kids.
Right.
In this book. Like, that's just not, it's not even their book. Like, that's just not how it's going to work out. I think it was Barry's book at the time. So, like, obviously Wally's kids aren't going to die. And the way that he got around it is at the end of the story, he, like, there's a big celebration, everything's fine. Wally's off to the side, Linda comes up and is like, hey, what's up? And he's like, I made a choice. I chose which of my kids that I was going to save over the other, and I have to live with that. And that, to me, was like, yes, that's the correct way of dealing with False Jeopardy. What am I learning from this character? What am I gaining from this? What emotional connective tissue piece am I getting that I maybe am not getting from the main storyline or the main timeline or whatever? That to me is the most important part of these Elseworld stories or multiverse stories is what you learn emotionally.
Yeah, it's like a prism to refract a character through, I think,
Absolutely.
When it's done well. And that's something, we've been doing this show for a year and a half now, and we've added questions for ourselves when we go through an alternate universe about, like, what did we learn about this character from this alternate universe? Because the best stories that's what they're doing. They're telling you something, even though it's not necessarily the canonical version of the character, they're revealing something that's built into the DNA of the canonical version that you know.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
So I know we don't want to take much more of your time, but we do like to wrap up with a fun moment or a serious moment, or just wondering what your dream what if or amalgam would be. So either characters you'd like to see mashed up, or a question you'd like posed to explore. Golly.
I know, I saw this on the list of questions, whether or not I'm supposed to reveal that there was one. And I was like, I'm gonna just figure it out in the moment, because I don't want to think about this right now. That's too hard. And now I'm here and I'm like, I didn't think about this in the moment. I think it would definitely be something about the absence of community. Either about, like, Reed in the absence of his family in the Fantastic Four, or Batman in the absence of his family as the Bat family. Like, I am so fascinated by how community makes us who we are and is important to the characters that we are. I have constantly said that, like, for me, Batman is Batman when there is a Robin as well. Sherlock Holmes is not Sherlock Holmes without Watson. These other people, they may be considered to be sidekicks, but they are also crucial in understanding the character and for the character to be their full self. So, I mean, maybe it's a world without sidekicks. What would that look like? What would that look like for the heroes, and how would they be who they are?
Yeah,
I love that. And I think as a queer person too, I'm hearing the absence of that chosen family that is coming so much, whether it's Ben Grimm or whether it's a Robin or another sidekick. Those are those characters, the cis white male characters' chosen family in many cases.
Oftentimes their most important relationship is with those characters.
1,000%. Yeah, I mean, Batman, it's entirely found family. Like, he found all of them. And yeah, you're right. It's the chosen family and the importance and the necessity of, like, how we cannot move through life without a chosen family.
Yeah. Well, I love that theme. I even feel like it's in the first two issues of Tim Drake Robin. I can see it because there's so many moments in the narration that he's speaking where it's clear that he's exploring who he is, not being the end Robin of Batman, and you didn't have to put him in an Elseworlds where Batman disappears, or you didn't have to do that. You're still sort of exploring that question.
Yeah.
Just in the title, and I love it.
Trying to give him a new sort of found family. If the Bat family is his real family, what are the people that's one of the best things, like the most fun things about having the marina has been all the people that he's around, and having Darcy and bringing back Detective Williams and playing around with all of the different people that make up Tim's found family is just as important.
Yeah. Well, and we talked about this at New York Comic Con, and I'm waiting and hoping one day there is Tim and John Kent. I am really ready for Tim and John to have an issue that you write together. I think they'd be fast friends, so I really would like to see that.
He's a little busy at this point, so I'm gonna put my dance card on John's counter and see.
And the other thing, it sounds like I hope one day you get to write is Fantastic Four. There's definitely that's a recurring thing for you. So I'm gonna start the campaign now, early.
That. Yes. I appreciate
for you to
that.
end up on Fantastic Four one day.
That's very kind. You say that. I also don't know. Like, I care so much about it that I don't know if I would fall apart. I think I would just be like, oh no. Everything would be
a meet your heroes kind of.
Yeah,
quite literally in this case.
Quite literally. Yes, exactly.
Well, thank you, Megan. This was so fantastic. And before we let you go, can you let our listeners know if they want to learn more about your work or follow you? Where should they go?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. This has been wonderful. When I met you guys at New York Comic Con, I was like, these guys are the best. So I'm so pleased that we were able to make this happen. I am at MEGFITZ 89 everywhere. MegFits89 across all platforms because I am unoriginal. So you can find me there anywhere. I'm also on my you can go to my website. There's a lot of easy links to things, whether you're interested in podcasts or movies or TV shows, comics, any of that. That's Megan Fitzmartin at Gmail, or not at Gmail. Megan Fitzmartin. I was like, that's also not my email, so I don't know why I was giving that. MeganFitzmartin.com. And what else was in that? MeganFitzmartin.com. Did I have anything else beyond that? No. I think that's it. I told you guys this before we started recording. I just finished a deadline, so my brain is it's like working at maybe 20% right now.
Well, we're going to let you recharge your brain, but thank you. It didn't seem like it was working at 20%, that's for sure.
Thank you. It only started glitching out near the end here, so that worked out real well for me. Awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks for coming.